Chapter 42 Temple of a Thousand Lights endlessly illuminating the lingering night. Julien never imagined anyone would actually pass the wine cup to him. Unfortunately, he reacted too fast and took the cup without thinking, but the moment he did, he froze. However, when he looked to see who had handed him the cup, the other party was also dumbfounded. It was Ming Yi. As it turned out, when the wine cup previously found itself in Shi Qingxuan's hand, Shi Qingxuan had thought it would be funny to give it to Ming Yi. However, Ming Yi had been quite busy stuffing his face and drinking his own wine, and hadn't even bothered to look up before passing the wine cup in a random direction. Only after the cup had been delivered did he realize what had happened and was struck speechless. At that exact moment, the thunder stopped rumbling, leaving Julien and Ming Yi staring blankly at each other. Although the one who received the wine cup was Julien, everyone's gaze moved to Fengshen and Muqing. It wasn't hard to understand why. Julien had not been mentioned or heard of for 800 years. 800 years ago, there naturally would have been plenty of plays depicting his heroism, but those plays had long since been lost to time. Besides, no one would pick such an auspicious day to set up a stage to perform just for Julien, and so it followed that if they had to find a play with a role for the Crown Prince of Shinla, it would have to be one starring either Fengshen or Muqing. In Mortal Realm plays written for those two heavenly officials, at times the story would involve Julien, usually as a foil or an extra, or for the sake of making the play more exciting. Some would rewrite Julien as the villain, spinning stories depicting the lonely, abandoned Muqing being bullied, or Julien robbing Fengshen of his beloved, and so on. If such plays were shown at the Mid-Autumn Banquet, whether the officials in question would be pleased was hardly a concern, since the rest of the audience would definitely enjoy it. Julien held that small jade cup in his hand, and some heavenly officials were already urging him, "Your Highness, come, 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 down the cup!" A few joined in the pestering, and Fengshen spoke from his spot far away. "His Highness can't drink." "Just one cup, it won't do anything," the crowd urged. Junwoo had not said a word throughout the performances, simply sitting with his hands supporting his temple. Now he also straightened as if to speak. Besides Julien, Shi Qingxuan asked, "Can you do it? If not, then whatever. I'll help you throw the 100,000 merits to drop the curtains." Julien was afraid she really would throw away 100,000 merits on impulse. No matter how generous she was, that wasn't the way to go about things. Besides, he'd seen pretty much every play there was, and there wasn't anything worth paying attention to. He hastily replied, No, a cup shouldn't be a problem." Then Julien emptied the cup. Fine brew flowed down his throat, leaving in its wake a path that was first cool, then hot. He felt a little dizzy, but the taste of that refined drink pushed down the dizziness in an instant. The curtains around the pavilion slowly lifted, and the crowd moved their attention there, ready to focus on the play. They were amazed by what they saw. Two figures stood on stage. One was dressed in white with a bamboo hat on his back, looking windswept and dusty, with a face as fair as powder. This was no doubt Julien. The other was dressed in red, his ebony hair as black as ink. He had a handsome face and a lithe form, and his eyes were bright and charming. A snake was wrapped around his arm, which Julien stripped away. However, that red-robed man snatched the snake back in a flash, before tossing it aside. He then clutched Julien's hand with no intent of letting go. This scene made Julien feel like he'd been violently stabbed by a knife to the heart. The heavenly officials who had been eager to watch a good show, and they were astonished. Of course, Julien with himself was also flabbergasted. Junwoo chuckled from his spot at the head of the banquet. "What play is this? Seems it has never been performed before." Ling Wen immediately sent for someone to investigate, then gave his report. "It appears this play is called Adventures in the Kingdom of Banquet. It's newly written, so it's indeed never been shown before. Tonight is its debut performance in the mortal realm." Shi Qingxuan turned to Julien. "It was probably written by those merchants we met, after they returned from the Kingdom of Banquet. There'll be no need to pull the curtains. We saved ourselves some merits." Julien didn't comment. Those merchants were the only mortals who knew of the incident in the Kingdom of Banquet, so only they could be behind this play. He recalled a boy named Tiansheng in that caravan, who had indeed said something along the lines of worshipping Julien as thanks. Perhaps he had commissioned this play? However, Julien hadn't told Tiansheng his name, and a young boy couldn't have arranged something like this. Although the heavenly officials weren't watching the play they expected, the performance before them was even more exciting. After all, if the rumors were true, then the role that red-robed man was playing was none other than Huacheng. There were plenty of plays about Crimson Rain-sought Flower in the mortal realm, but they were usually titled something like "The Red Demon Torched the Temples of 33 Gods, and the Heavens Could Do Fuck All About It," or "Crimson Rain-sought Flower strung up the martial and civil gods and slapped them around with but one hand," and so on. The kind of stories that would make those in the heavens cry silent tears, with zero desire to find out how they ended. In any case, the protagonist this time was Julien. The officials present felt like he'd never fit in and could hardly be truly counted as one of their own, so watching this play did no harm. Besides, the staging was intricate, the production exquisite, the actors extremely well made up. Truly, it was a great piece of painstaking effort. Many secretly enjoyed the show in all sincerity, and they provided running commentary as they watched. Is that true? That must be made up. Hua Cheng would never talk like that to anyone. Nonsense, pure nonsense. Who does this play take Hua Cheng for? Wake up, this isn't a romantic drama. Goodness, how daring. As this was, in the end, a play written just for Julien, he watched it attentively. If he had to provide an earnest review, it wasn't bad. The actors looked good. The story was good. Just as one of the characters being portrayed, he had a teeny tiny criticism. The two protagonists seemed overly familiar with each other. The one who played Julien was a really talented actor, but every time he opened his mouth to call for Sanlang, although the tone didn't rise up and down or brim with yearning, Julien thought it somehow was even more unsettling than when Lady Windmaster had called Lord Watermaster her hubby earlier that night. Also, there seemed to be too many little gestures. The actors were always hooking arms, hugging shoulders, and embracing each other. Somehow something wasn't right about it. But if Julien really thought about it, when he called for Sunlung, that was indeed the tone he always used, and all those intimate gestures really did seem faithful to the source material as well. He hadn't thought there was anything wrong with it at the time, and watching it now, technically there still wasn't anything wrong. If he looked at the other heavenly officials, although their lips condemned the show as nonsense, they seemed to be fully enjoying it, and watched with rapt attention and enthusiastic interest. And so Julien kept his mouth shut. As they watched, Shiwudu suddenly spoke up. Who are those two servant boys in the back? At the words servant boys, both Fengshen and Muqing imperceptibly froze for a moment. They're not servant boys, Ling Wen replied. Those should be two junior martial officials from the middle court. They were appointed by the palaces of Nanyang and Zhongzhen to assist in His Highness's emergency request. That the palaces of Nanyang and Zhongzhen had actually sent people to assist Julien was truly extraordinary news, as impossible to imagine as Pei Ming courteously rejecting the advances of a peerless beauty, and all the heavenly officials turned to look. Ling Wen added, They went voluntarily. Julien smiled. I forgot to ask, how are Nanfeng and Fuyao? Why didn't I see them come out to play today? Nanfeng is, Fengshen said. Muqing replied evenly, Fuyao is in detention. Fengshen replied as well, Nanfeng is also in detention. Julien made a neutral noise. Both of them are locked up, he commented. What a shame. While they conversed, the curtains dropped on that exhilarating play. Although all present determined that it had been written by an ignorant believer with indecent fantasies, watching an obscene Hua Cheng was still fully entertaining, and the crowd cheered and applauded. However, Pei Su had been exiled because of what happened at the Banquet Pass, so everyone still had to bind Pei Ming after the entertainment ended. How's your little Pei doing, General Pei? Shiwudu inquired. Pei Ming poured himself a cup and drank, shaking his head. How well can he do? His heart isn't in the right place. I don't care anymore. Shi Qingxuan couldn't listen further. So, in General Pei's opinion, where's the right place for his heart? She scoffed. Your little Pei's future is a future, but the little Missy's future is nothing? Her tone was impudent, and Shiwudu's sharp gaze swept over. Qingxuan, mind your manners. The moment he reprimanded her, Shi Qingxuan lowered her head, shamefaced. Pei Ming laughed at the sight of this. Watermaster Xiong, your little brother is quite the force to be reckoned with. Only you can keep him in line. It isn't really anything to worry about if he messes with me. But if he messes with the wrong people, then they won't let it go so easily for your sake. Shiwudu opened his fan and continued to lecture his younger sibling. Did you hear what General Pei said? And how many times do I have to tell you not to walk around in that form all the time? What a disgrace. I don't care what appearance you prefer. You must use your true form when you're out. Although Shi Qingxuan loved her lady form passionately and wouldn't stand for such outrageous demands, she still didn't dare offend her brother. Julien thought, the Windmaster says she's not afraid of her older brother, but that doesn't seem to be entirely true. Yet unexpectedly, Shiwudu ended the lecture with, What if you encounter someone with wicked intent who's strong in spiritual power, like General Pei? Ling Wen laughed unkindly, and Pei Ming nearly spat out his wine again. Watermaster Xiong! If you keep that up, we can't be pals anymore. After the feasting was over, amidst the clinking cups, it came time at last for the final act of the night, the Battle of the Lanterns. Every candle and lamp within the heavenly capital was extinguished, and all was dim except for the light of the moon. The banquet was set up near a lake, and when the clouds and mist on the surface were waved away, the deep darkness of the mortal realm could be seen through the clear waters. The Battle of the Lanterns was a competition to see which heavenly official was offered the greatest number of blessings lanterns from their largest, most renowned temple. One blessings lantern of everlasting light was hard enough to buy with 1,000 gold, and even they could not be easily extinguished. The order of the Battle of the Lanterns was called from lowest to highest, and when it was an official's turn, the lanterns offered by their worshippers floated past the heavenly banquet to brighten the long, dark night in an incomparably enchanting display. The Palace of Divine Might had 961 lanterns this year, a count close to 1,000, and a number that had never before been reached in heavenly history. The heavenly officials felt that next year the count would surely break 1,000, but that wasn't the point. If first place was always first place, then first place lost meaning, so the Palace of Divine Might was automatically discounted from the running when it came to the battle. The moment the Battle of the Lanterns began, the first one up was the Rainmaster, and the lantern tally was both funny and embarrassing. When Julien saw that one little errant blessing lantern floating leisurely to the sky and heard, "The Palace of the Rainmaster, 1 lantern," he almost suspected he had become drunk and hadn't yet sobered up. There was no way it could be only 1 lantern. To make sure he wasn't impaired, he asked Shi Qingxuan, "Is that correct?" "It is," Shi Qingxuan replied. "It really is just that one, and that one was lit by the bowl from the Rainmaster's own house for the sake of showing face at the feast." Self-offering. What an endearing sentiment. Julien pondered for a moment. The Rainmaster controlled rain, and was thus the god of agriculture. He guessed aloud, "Is it because the worshippers of the Rainmaster are mostly farmers, so they don't have the funds for offerings?" "Your Highness, do you have some kind of misunderstanding about farmers?" Shi Qingxuan asked. "A lot of farmers are wealthy, okay? It's only because the Lord Rainmaster has always told them it's better to work the fields than to use money for offerings, so those followers always offer fresh fruit and vegetables instead." Julien was extremely envious when he heard this. What a marvelous thing, he thought. Shi Qingxuan continued. And then later, Lord Rainmaster also said not to waste anything, so usually after a couple of days, the worshippers take home the offerings to eat themselves. At the beginning of the battle, the numbers were scattered and sparse, and the lights belonging to the lower-ranked officials went from a few to a few dozen. It attracted very little interest from the crowd. But as the battle continued, the brighter the rising lanterns shined, the more attention everyone paid. If not for the dedicated heavenly official who tallied and announced the numbers, it would be impossible to count the densely packed lanterns floating up. Julien didn't at all understand what was going on, so he didn't comment on anything, instead listening to everyone else's analysis of how the competition was going, while admiring the beautiful scene of lanterns illuminating the long, black night. Although, personally, he didn't think there was really anything to analyze. After about 2 incense time, they'd finally come to the grand finale. The fight for top 10 in the Battle of the Lanterns at the Mid-Autumn Festival Banquet had begun. At the bottom of the top 10, Julien heard the announcer shout, "The Palace of Qi Ying, 421 lanterns." Kong Yizhen had long since left the feast, so the other officials didn't bother to hide the clicking of their tongues when they heard the count. The martial god of the West was young, but his headwind was strong. 200 blessing lanterns was plenty to other heavenly officials who had around the same amount of experience. Yet, he had more than double that count. Even Leng Chenshou, who had ascended earlier, didn't have as many lanterns, so Kong Yizhen was indeed impressive. However, Julien felt the young man wasn't really that well received in the heavens. Other than himself and Shi Qingxuan, practically no one else was sincerely awed by the number. Next up, the Palace of the Earthmaster, 444 lanterns. Other than taking the opportunity to slurp down 2 more spoonfuls of soup, Ming Yi had no further reaction to the news. Shi Qingxuan was far more excited than he was, repeatedly proclaiming, "Too few! Too few!" Because no one else was close with the Lord Earthmaster, they only clapped politely in congratulations. Soon after, it was Shi Qingxuan herself, the Palace of the Windmaster, 523 lanterns. A person's popularity is something plainly evident. When the lantern count for the Palace of the Windmaster was announced, Shi Qingxuan hadn't even said anything before applause from the banquet roared, with hollers and cheers of "Congratulations!" and "As expected!" everywhere. Shi Qingxuan was quite proud, standing up to cup her hands at the crowd before she gleefully shouted to Shi Wudu, "Gah! I'm 8th this year!" She was acting like a child begging her parents for a reward after having been praised by her teacher, and Julien couldn't help but smile. However, Shi Wudu sharply scolded her. Only 8th. What's there to be happy about? His words were actually quite presumptuous. In the upper court, no one was a nobody, yet ranking as high as 8th overall, with 500 blessing lanterns, became nothing more than only 8th from his lips. So, didn't that mean the ones who ranked lower than 8th were even more worthless? It wasn't like he didn't understand his words were arrogant. He said them simply because he was unafraid. Shi Qingxuan's expression slumped. Shi Wudu fluttered his fan and added, with great difficulty, "Even so, there are more lanterns than last year. Next year must be better as well." Hearing this, Shi Qingxuan smiled and laughed again. At the banquet, only Ming Yi didn't cheer for her, as he was wholly occupied with stuffing his face. Shi Qingxuan smacked him a couple times, insisting upon some congratulations, but Ming Yi ignored her completely and continued to devour his food. Shi Qingxuan was outraged and demanded once more that he applaud her, and next to them, Shi Lian laughed so hard that he lost his breath. Next, the palace of Ling Wen, 536 lanterns. Among the civil gods, Ling Wen was considered number 1. However, not too many civil gods congratulated him. Instead, it was the martial gods who sent their regards. Shi Lian congratulated him from afar, and Shi Wudu and Pei Ming demanded that Ling Wen hold a celebratory feast. Grumbles from other heavenly officials could be heard all around. There were complaints that Ling Wen only had so many worshippers because she used a male form. There was griping that Ling Wen had no time for other civil gods, while she curried the favor of the more popular martial gods. There were comments that Ling Wen had snatched this rank only because she held the most feasts, and that there were prostitutes at those feasts, etc., etc. Shi Lian shook his head and had only one thing to say. It really wasn't easy being a female official. Following Ling Wen were the palaces of Nanyang and Shenzhen, counted at 572 and 573. Mu Qing looked relaxed and pleased, while Feng Shen appeared neither happy nor angry, and seemingly didn't care. Shi Lian was mystified. How had the count come so close? That was surely too near to be a coincidence. He asked Shi Qingxiong in a hushed voice, and as it turned out, the close count was indeed a matter of similarity. The two of them had similar backgrounds, similar might, territories right next to each other's, and an unfriendly relationship on top of all that. Worshippers on both sides fought to win specifically against the other, vowing that however many lanterns the other side offered, they would offer just one more. They didn't ask to be number 1, just better than the other side. They put everything they had into achieving this goal, and every year there'd be a victorious side and a defeated one. This year, the Palace of Shenzhen squeezed out one more lantern at the very last second, narrowly winning against the Palace of Nanyang. The worshippers looked like they had won a battle and were celebrating wildly. Hearing this, Shi Lian couldn't help but think, rather than fighting each other to the death outside, shouldn't those people be home to celebrate the holiday? It's the Mid-Autumn Festival, a time for family reunions.